incredible year has been for handheld devices. The market is showing no signs of slowing down, and we are finding ourselves with more and more options. Most importantly, there are more choices now to suit someone's individual needs. Enter Logitech, who has been creating peripherals for decades now, but is a newcomer to the handheld gaming space. In a surprising move, the Logitech G Cloud Handheld is an Android-based cloud gaming-focused handheld and is certainly positioned differently than the competition. However, how does this translate to the real world, and how does the device perform specifically at what it's targeted for and beyond that? Please join me, the Retro Tech Dad, as we take a comprehensive and lengthy look at the new G Cloud Handheld from Logitech. Alright, let's drop some specs on this thing. The Logitech G Cloud Handheld comes equipped with a 7-inch 16:9 ratio 1920x1080 IPS LCD panel with a brightness of 450 nits and a 60 Hz screen refresh. It is powered by the Qualcomm Snapdragon 720G with 8 cores up to 2.3 GHz. It is available in one configuration with 4GB of LPDDR4 RAM and a 64GB of internal storage that is expandable with the microSD slot. Out of the box, it comes with Android 11, a 6000 mAh 23.1 Wh battery that, according to Logitech, supports more than 12 hours under normal playing conditions. This is a Wi-Fi only enabled device with dual band 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz support and up to 802.11 AC. It is available now at $349 and was available for pre-order at $299, which is the price I purchased it for. Okay, finally time for the unboxing. It's always good to know what's in the box before we open the box. Let's cut that seal open, and one more time for posterity. I'm glad Logitech opted for the fold-out box that I'm becoming quite a fan of nowadays, and a quick reveal of the Keep Playing slogan that Logitech seems to be pushing with this device. Let's have a look inside, and here we are with another box-in-a-box scenario, with what appears to have all of the goodies that we need to get started. Here we have our USB Type-C to A cable, and in a nice change of pace, Logitech was kind enough to provide a G sticker, which I can't wait to slap on some random object. And now the other side reveals the power adapter. One of my favorite parts of the unboxing is the highly enjoyable sound of the screen protector. So let's take a look at the G handheld starting from the top of the device. We have the L1 and L2 in a stacked configuration, the volume up and down rocker, power switch, micro SD slot, and then finally R1 and R2. The shoulder buttons have a nice textured plastic, and I will comment to say that I like the two-tone look here. Okay, coming around the device down to the bottom, and here is where we have our downward firing stereo speakers with the USB Type-C port for charging and data only with no video out, and a 3.5mm jack for headphones. On the back of the device, the plastic is textured for the grip and makes the device feel very comfortable in the hands. It's nice to see the almost full-size analog sticks. I do wish they had some kind of different texture than what is present here, kind of like something you would see on the Xbox Series controller. The D-pad is a little weird, and you will notice that it is very responsive on the edges of the D-pad and clicks in well. However, moving towards the center, it does not pivot all that well and has less motion and feels, for a lack of better words, mushy. The start and select buttons have a raised point on them to make them easy to recognize when trying to select them. You will notice that the G has large buttons in the ABXY configuration, and they are quite nice to press down on and responsive. The buttons do sit below the face of the device when pressing down on them. I don't find it to be much of an issue, but in comparison to something like the Win600 here, for example, you can see how it sits above the device when pressed down. So let's focus our attention on these shoulder buttons again. I will comment and say that the shoulder buttons are easy for my fingers to reach and press down from any spot on them. A nice feature of this device is the inclusion of the full analog triggers, which has been missing on a lot of devices I have recently tested, including the Win600 and Retroid Pocket 3. The triggers have a nice smooth range of motion, and I didn't encounter any weird locking or poor finishing. And yeah, overall the device feels very nice in the hands. I like the grips, weight, and size of the device. I think it's a nice balance between all of that. So how does the G stack up to other familiar devices in terms of size and weight? Oh boy, I apologize here, but the Steam Deck seems to be excited to finally make an appearance on my channel. So here's the device we are actually talking about. So first up is the Nintendo Switch, and you can see that it is slightly wider than that device, mostly due to the protruding grips on the ends, which does add to the comfort of the G. Here's the fan favorite retro handheld, the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus, and the more recent Retroid Pocket 3. And the return of the big boy, the Steam Deck, which obviously dwarfs the G in size. I do apologize, the Steam Deck doesn't seem to know when to take a clue and get out of the shop. Okay, so I wanted to show the thickness of the G compared to these devices because it is a very svelte handheld, and I appreciate the thinness of the unit, especially in terms of weight and comfort. Here is the Steam Deck, which will be slightly thicker because of the active cooling, the Retroid Pocket 3, which is very similar in thickness, and finally the Nintendo Switch, which also is surprisingly thin given its active cooling. Time for a quick weight check. I couldn't get the G to behave, so we're just gonna go ahead and flip it over. As you can see, it comes in at about 461 grams or just over 16 ounces. Now to refresh our memory, let's check the weight of some other devices. The Switch comes in at 14 ounces or 397 grams. Then our big boy, the Steam Deck, at 677 grams or a whopping 24 ounces. A very paltry 8.25 ounces or 234 grams for the Retroid Pocket 3. Finally rounding out the devices with the Win600 at 494 grams or about 17.5 ounces, putting the G somewhere in the middle weight-wise. Alright, let's get this thing turned on and going. Yay for animations, and wow, this is becoming quite a common screen on my channel. I think I have the Android 11 setup memorized at this point, so I think we're just gonna fly through the setup process and move along as this is all fairly standard. Okay, so welcome to the handheld mode interface of the gcloud handheld. We will be making a return to this shortly, but first let's talk the display and build quality. So as you can see, I am putting a good amount of force on the device, and I am not getting any kind of flexing. It's very solid structurally, the plastics, textures, and just overall build quality is very good. I have to say, I just like the way the G feels in my hands. The display gets sufficiently bright, which Logitech claims hits 450 nits. This 7-inch display really lets games come through on this vivid screen with very good viewing angles. The image does not get washed out or distorted at harsh angles. Finally, a quick test of the controller functionality, including the analog sticks and analog triggers. Again, everything is working as it should, including the touchscreen. Okay, so let's come back to the user interface experience here on the gcloud. As you can see, the device is in handheld mode, which is Logitech's custom front end for the gcloud. However, you might notice that it is very simple and bare bones in functionality. On the top, we have access to basic things like account, messages, which appears to be pulled from your notifications, access to the photo album, settings, and power options. In this settings screens, we have most of the basic things you would expect, like access to the wireless network, Bluetooth, and display options. You can also remap the controller buttons through this screen. Accessibility options, which just takes you to the Android accessibility screen. System updates are accessible here, and hey, there's one waiting for me right now. Might as well download it. device information, and then additional settings, which again takes you back to Android. Under device information, you can switch back to tablet mode. Okay, here we are in your vanilla Android 11 experience, which most Android users will feel right at home with. So let's talk about some of the issues with handheld mode and the drawbacks of its bare bones approach to the user interface. I want to demonstrate something that I noticed by accident when switching back and forth between tablet and handheld mode. So you may be noticing that I'm opening and then closing a good amount of games and apps right now. I suggest trying to make note of what I have opened and confirmed to close back in the launcher's home screen. So back in tablet mode, one quick swipe up and you will see that all the apps that were supposedly closed have not in fact been closed at all. You can see that there are actually 6 apps open all at the same time, despite that I confirmed closing these apps when I was in handheld mode. As it is, we are only working with 4 GB of RAM on this device, and this seems like a huge oversight to me. Another thing you might have noticed while I was navigating within handheld mode is that no touchscreen gestures work properly while in this mode. Now this really becomes very annoying when you are trying to configure different emulators, which, granted, is not the focus of this device. I will be honest and say that I find game mode to be completely useless, and I have actually spent most of my time in the tablet mode. So enough about the user interface, let's talk about games. Now, for someone who has been gaming for over 30 years, and at one point had a sizable physical collection, I've now mostly transitioned to being a digital-only gamer. However, cloud gaming is something that I've been resistant to using with any sort of consistency. Now, that is not to say that I do not think cloud gaming deserves a space in the gaming industry. It's quite the opposite, as I have been interested in the technology for many years now, going way back to the Nvidia Shield Portable and Nvidia's early rollout of what would eventually become GeforceNow today. With the gcloud, I am finding myself very excited again to try out services meaningfully like GeforceNow and Xbox Gamepass's cloud gaming service. So enough backstory, let's head into our first demonstration of cloud gaming on the G with a look at Xbox Game Pass and the recently released Persona 5 Royal. Now, as we know, the G is primarily designed to be a cloud-focused device, and Xbox Game Pass is indeed a service that is preloaded on the handheld and ready for you to sign in and start playing. Now, I have to say it's perfect timing that I get to not only play Persona 5 again, but also do it testing out the cloud service, and I have to say I was very impressed with the performance. In fact, there were only occasional moments that I could notice any sort of artifacting, but overall, cloud gaming on Xbox Game Pass has come quite a long way, and it's definitely a viable alternative to playing games natively, especially on underpowered hardware. This technology is an obvious game changer as long as your internet connection is up to snuff, which by the way, I have a 0.5 gigabit connection with excellent ping times and latency. Additionally, I did not run out and buy a new router just for this whole experience, and despite all of that, it's working great here. It really is like having access to an Xbox, and you can use the G button to bring up the Xbox menu and access your friends list or achievements just like you would on a console. So let's jump from Persona 5 and check out another game to see how the whole thing works. The interface is easy to navigate and should be fairly familiar to whoever has used the service before. Okay, so let's jump into some TMNT Shredder's Revenge, which I definitely have featured on my channel before. And yeah, there you have it. You can see how quick and seamless it is, and just looking at the intro video playing, you can see how clean the feed is. Okay, so let's do a little gameplay and wrap up the Xbox Game Pass section. Alright, so now it's time to try out Nvidia's attempt at cloud gaming, and as I mentioned briefly, Nvidia has been at this for a long time now, and so I am very excited to see how the service and technology has matured over the years. So first thing I noticed was that I had the ability to sync up my libraries from Ubisoft, Epic Games, and Steam. so I decided to sign into my Steam account and see what I would be able to play from my decently sized Steam library. I was pleasantly surprised to see a decent selection of games for me just to be able to play right here with GeForce Now. Additionally, I should point out that I am only using the free basic tier of the service right now, which allows you to have up to 1 hour gameplay sessions, less priority to rigs, which means you could be waiting a few minutes during busier times to connect to the game. However, I wanted to test the service first before committing to anything, so I decided to launch an old friend and check out Hollow Knight to quickly see the video quality and latency. Similar to Xbox, I was very impressed by just how well everything is working here. Now, I noticed that Genshin Impact is part of GeForce Now, so naturally I wanted to load it up and try this out. I have to say I'm very impressed that I was basically able to jump right into Genshin and it is working incredibly well. In fact, I had a hard time trying to figure out if this was in fact playing natively or not. By the way, you will want to use GeForce Now to play this game, since the Android version, unlike the iOS version, still does not have native controller support, which means that it will not work with the native controls of the G handheld. Additionally, Logitech decided to forego any kind of gamepad mapping, which I will touch upon more later. However, given that Genshin is an online-only game, you might as well enjoy this version of it through cloud with its built-in native controls. Finally, I wanted to try out Amazon's cloud service known as Luna. I've come close a couple of times to pulling the trigger and trying out the service, but this will be my first time trying it out. You might notice that I did add Amazon Luna on my own, as it is not included out of the box with the device. On that note, I will mention that you need to go to the Amazon Luna website and then add Luna to your home screen, which is not installed to the device, but rather as something known as a PWA, or a progressive web app. In simple terms, it's basically using the web browser as the interface for accessing your content and streaming games. Now, the cool thing about Luna is that as a Prime member, you do get access to a rotation of games to play for free. So I decided to check out Earthworm Jim 2. You're going to get all these warnings, but ignore them since the controller works fine and the device is obviously able to stream games. So I have to be honest, right off the bat, something is way off here, and really, it is not giving me a good first impression. Now take a look when I press down on the D-pad to when it relays on screen. I mean, this is a very obvious delay, and is making this classic game very difficult to play. So I can see why Luna is not one that gets thrown around a whole lot in this scene, and honestly, wouldn't surprise me if it went the way of Stadia, or maybe it's just Google that likes to abandon their projects. Now, I want to quickly touch upon local game streaming, and I did test out both Moonlight and Steam in-game streaming, and it does work fairly well, but again, this is all dependent on your home network. If your computer is hardwired, or if your home router is up to snuff to handle local game streaming. Alright, so we've briefly sampled the capabilities of stream gaming on this device. Now, what else can we do with this beyond just relying on game streaming? So for this segment, I thought it would be nice to check out a few Android games, and I wanted to show a different set of games than I've done in the past. So first up is a really fantastic 2D side-scrolling platformer that has great visuals and gameplay. Wheels Fortune has been around for quite some time on the Play Store, but I wanted to demonstrate it here and show off a great Android game. As expected, the game has no issues playing on the gcloud, and the built-in controls are working great. So let's try out a game that is a little more difficult to run. I thought it would be fun to change it up and not show Horizon Chase for once. So here we have a fantastic port of Grid Autosport for Android, and I really do wish we would get more ports like this, since the platform is obviously more than capable of handling experiences like this. I will say that I wanted to showcase this game because I was curious to see if it performed better than how it did on the Retroid Pocket 3, which it does. So moving on to another game that performs better on the G than on the Retroid Pocket 3 is Sky. This game comes to us from That Game Company, and some of you may know how much I enjoy this studio and their games going way back to Journey. Anyways, Sky is playing a lot smoother here on the gcloud, and I'm really glad because this is a cool game. Lastly, I wanted to test Call of Duty Mobile. And well, that was very short-lived because the game doesn't work with the built-in controls. And the development team at Logitech didn't seem to think a gamepad mapper was a needed feature here. Too bad, because again, the device is more than capable of running this. Okay, so let's talk emulation, and as I'm sure many of my viewers are aware, Android is a fantastic platform for this. So my goal in this segment is to demonstrate that performance in emulation is going to be better than on something like the Retroid Pocket 3. First up is PlayStation Portable, and of course Outrun 2006, which by now is no secret that it is one of my favorite racing games ever. Now I have Outrun 2006 running here at 2x native resolution, and performance is pretty good overall. The game looks especially good on this 16:9 display, and I am curious to explore the library further on this device. Please let me know in the comments if you want me to make my first video on PSP games using this device as as the baseline. Moving on to something harder, we have the ever-evolving and impressive Ether SX2. Both games being featured are using the fast, unsafe preset with no additional changes to keep things simple. First up, making a return from my video on PS2 emulation with the Retroid Pocket 3, is We Love Katamari. Now, I will find any excuse to feature this game just to hear Katamari on the Swing play again. Anyways, this game is running smoother here despite it being very playable on the Retroid Pocket 3. Now here's a game that is performing better on the gcloud, and that is the overlooked gem from Incognito known as Downhill Domination. Again, it's a game that has been featured in some capacity on the channel, but is a good indication that we can go a little further with PS2 emulation using that Snapdragon 720G. Let me know if you want me to give a similar treatment for the gcloud as I have done in the past for the Win600, Retroid Pocket 3, and the GPD XP+. And finally, we have come to the last platform that I will be demonstrating with emulation. For both games, I am using the Dolphin for Handheld build from the Retroid Pocket. Both games are also set to native resolution, which is already an improvement over what can be done with the Retroid Pocket 3. First, let's check out a game that doesn't run so well on the Retroid Pocket 3, and that is Mario Kart Double Dash. I'm happy to report that this game is running very well here, and I've done a few cup races to try out different tracks, and again, it was very smooth, which is great to see. Double Dash is always a good time, and I really love the gameplay mechanics in this specific entry of Mario Kart. And of course, we have Wind Waker up next, but I've decided to throw a curveball and show a different area using a save file. The performance here is significantly better than what we have seen on the Retroid Pocket devices, given that the frame rate is steady at 30 and also running at native resolution. Maybe my expectations are low, but I'm pretty pleased given that we are working with a Snapdragon 720G. And of course I couldn't resist, but here is the opening segment of the game, and again, it's a noticeable improvement over what I have demonstrated here on the channel, and shows that we should be getting better Gamecube emulation on this device overall. As I mentioned for PS2 and PSP emulation, please let me know in the comments if this is something you want me to explore further in the future. And naturally, after all of this gaming, I like to do a temperature test, and I will say that the device never gets hot to the touch, no matter what I am doing with it. I haven't really observed surface temps above 31 degrees Celsius, so it is staying nice and cool throughout. The backside is staying even cooler, and considering this is where your hands will end up, this is a very good thing. And one more test to round it all out, which comes down to the battery. Now, as I mentioned, Logitech claims that this device will hit 12 or more hours under normal playing conditions. So I guess Grid Autosport is not what they would consider a normal playing condition, since this is a cloud-focused device. Regardless, I thought Grid would be a good test as it is a decently demanding 3D game. So with the volume and brightness set to 3 notches in the on-screen menu, I was able to get just under 10.5 hours. It's very respectable performance, and I will have to see under what conditions 12 hours comes into play. However, the Logitech will not be dethroning the king of battery life on my channel, which belongs to the GPD XP+. So this might be the most important section for a lot of my viewers, as we all really want to know how it stacks up to the competition. And given that the Logitech G is priced at $349 US, does it bring enough to the table to justify its price point in a vast ocean of choices? The first device I want to talk about, and probably the one most will be content with, is the Retroid Pocket 3. I have certainly featured the device quite a bit on my channel, and I think that between everyone else's coverage, we have a good indication of what to expect here with the Retroid. Now, the Retroid Pocket 3 starts at $119 US, and even with shipping and any additional fees, it is still more than half the price of the Logitech G. As you can see here, I am enjoying Persona 5 Royal on Game Pass with the Retroid Pocket 3, and it really seems to perform as well as the Logitech G. Now, what do you lose by choosing something like the Retroid Pocket 3? Well, obviously you end up with a slightly less powerful device, a smaller screen, omission of analog triggers, and the overall inputs are not as nice and full size as the Logitech. Now, let's say you have a little more room in your budget. Well, then you will probably be looking at something like the Steam Deck for $50 more, which gets you a substantial device that can play Persona 5 Royal natively, completely foregoing the need for streaming. That is not to say it can't do that either. In fact, it can do everything the Logitech G does. The Steam Deck, however, is a much bigger and heavier device, and despite it also having very solid full-size controls, is nowhere near as svelte as the Logitech G. Now, as I always do in my in-depth videos, I like presenting my viewers with things to consider, and building off my comparisons to other devices, you can see that the Logitech G Cloud finds itself in a peculiar position. Unfortunately, the device is truly the middle ground between something like a Retroid Pocket 3, and then on the upper end you would have something like a Steam Deck or even a Win 600. The problem is, at the price point of the Logitech, it finds itself on the upper end of devices, but really should be positioned somewhere between them. And I really do believe the device shouldn't have been any more than $249 US, and maybe even $199 to truly be competitive in this crowded space. Now, everyone's needs are different, and some might balk at the bulky size and weight of the Steam Deck, and be very content with sacrificing features for something like the Logitech G, which despite some of its shortcomings is an incredibly comfortable and enjoyable device to play on. In fact, the most frustrating thing for me is not that half-baked handheld mode or its underpowered chip, it's that Logitech couldn't see the pricing this thing to be dead on arrival was a mistake, especially given that so many people would have been on board at a fair price point and then get to enjoy this solid first attempt in the Android handheld space. However, it's hard to forgive an industry veteran like Logitech with some of these absurd missteps. The price, useless handheld mode, lack of a native gamepad mapper from a company that specializes in accessories, and smaller things like the weak Snapdragon or the lack of a cellular ability so that you can keep playing as Logitech suggests on their packaging, or perhaps better Wi-Fi capabilities, could be breaking points for a lot of my viewers. Thankfully, there has been excellent coverage on this device, and I highly recommend that if you are interested even at its price point, to absorb as much as you can so that you can make an educated choice. Regardless, it seems that we are in a never-ending rabbit hole of companies that keep, for whatever reason, making some kind of misstep, or there's always some kind of gotcha with these devices, and I think every company is at fault when it comes to this. So I will continue to bang my head against the wall and keep wondering when, if ever, we will get the one device to rule them all. For me, I will continue to enjoy Logitech's handheld, and I hope that this thing gets some realistic price cuts, because then more people will be able to enjoy this solid device. So if you manage to stay on for the ride through the end, I thank you very much, as this was probably the longest video I have published on YouTube yet. This is the Retro Tech Dad, signing out.